Welcome to the Practitioner's Chair, a leadership conversation series by Bridgepath Innovations, where we bring forward the voices of leaders who've built, scaled, and transformed global capability centers from the inside. In this series, we move beyond industry buzzwords and bring out experiences, challenges, and decisions of leaders who have helped transform successful organizations and global capability centers. The purpose of this series is to unravel practical insights for GCC leaders, enterprise executives, and also transformational aspirants who want to build organizations with enduring strategic capability. I'm Tanushree Nagaveni, a research analyst at Bridgepath Innovations, and today I'm joined on this episode of the Practitioners series by Suresh Margabandhu, a consulting partner at Bridgepath Innovations. Welcome, Suresh. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tanu. Looking forward to the discussion.
We often see that GCCs have evolved from cost and delivery centers to becoming strategic partners for the business. Few leaders have been an active participant in this evolution and have closely contributed to transforming GCCs from cost and efficiency centers to strategic capability organizations. And you're one of that leader who's actually been through this journey. So, within the capital and banking domain, what has been the most significant shift in the role and expectations of global capability centers when you began your career versus where they are today?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and it makes me think about my journey. When I started, I was actually, heading the private banking technology center for one of the global banks, out of India, and I think the expectation was primarily around, making sure that we deliver what was asked of us to be delivered. So that was the starting point. But at that time, the objectives were primarily around cost and efficiency. I mean, fast forward 15 years, today, I'm sorry to say, majority of the centers still are being set up and still are being expected to be, cost and efficiency centers, or cost centers rather,
Right.
Rather than, centers which are taking ownership and accountability. So while I say that, I mean, there are definitely a few exceptions, but I'm not seeing a big change. That there have been a few exceptions. I don't want to paint the whole industry in the same way, but accepting those, I think it's pretty much the same theme: cost and efficiency.
Right. So, despite the significant growth, as you also pointed out during this evolution, so we see that there's growth in scale, in talent, and investment. But many of the global capability centers still struggle to move beyond this execution led mandate. So, what do you think differentiates a successful global capability center from merely a execution partner to a business enterprise?
Yeah, very, valid question. At least where the industry is today, right? So, again, having been part of this journey for over 14 years, what I've seen this is, it's basically there are 5 important, influences or factors which drive this, evolution from being a delivery center or execution focused center to a center which is essentially a strategic part of the global enterprise. So, and those 5 things, I'll go one by one. So the first one is the enterprise strategy. So when I say enterprise strategy, what's the vision or what's the strategy at the enterprise level for the GCC? What do they expect the GCC to do?
Okay.
So again, coming back to my own example, when I started in 2010, the expectation was, I think, we had a completely outsourced model. So it was a ratio of 1:100, wherein like there used to be one employee of my organization compared to 100 vendor staff. Okay. That was a strategy, but the strategy evolved over a period of time, wherein the change in strategy meant that we could get more accountability and ownership.
Right.
Therefore, build the team here.
Right.
So enterprise strategy is the first lever or first aspect which should be focused on.
Mhm.
The second one is, while the enterprise, the CIO may think that this is the strategy, but you also need sufficient sponsorship from the senior leadership.
Right.
Again, when I say senior leadership, I'm referring to the divisional CIOs and departmental CIOs, because these are the people ultimately, their teams are the ones which are working out of the GCC.
Okay.
So again, going back to my own example, I had cases where some of the departmental CIOs were quite open
Mhm.
to the idea of giving some accountability and ownership to the India teams, while some were not. So we started small with those specific areas where we had that mandate coming from the divisional or departmental CIOs.
Right.
So that's the second aspect. Third one, which is very important, is to have the right level of maturity and capability on the leadership part within GCC.
Right.
So when I say GCC leadership, I'm not talking about the site head.
Okay.
It's about the people who are actually the departmental heads and the divisional heads out of the GCC.
Okay.
These people are keys because they have to inspire that confidence in their global leadership, and for that they need to have the right level of experience, both from a technology perspective as well as from a domain perspective.
Right.
In addition, they also need to have the right leadership skills, primarily in terms of influencing global stakeholders. Because without that, it's impossible to get more and more accountability and ownership into the GCC.
Right.
That's the third aspect. The fourth one, which is a non-negotiable, is around the delivering consistently, regularly, release over release, quarter after quarter, and year on year with the right level of quality. So without that, there is no way you're going to get move up the curve and
Right.
become strategic.
Mhm.
And last but not the least is, while I emphasized about the GCC leadership capability, we also need to look at the capability at the next two levels within the GCC, which could be the people who eventually become the the technical leaders or the solution architects or the application owners. Even they need to have the right level of functional, technical, and leadership qualities in order to deliver consistently. So they need to be respected by their peers
Yes.
over there outside of India. And that comes is very key for the success of the GCC. So I think, in summary, I would refer to these 5 elements as key for moving from a execution oriented center to one which becomes strategic part of the GCC.
That's definitely insightful, Suresh. So I think one theme that comes up very regularly in terms of strategic relevance is ownership. And that too in an industry where risk, control, and accountability are critical. So, in capital markets and banking organizations, we see that organizations tend to hesitate in transferring critical and decision making authority to global capability centers. From your experience, what do you think these organizations should do to gain the trust of the business enterprise and move beyond just remaining a execution partner?
Right. So, I mean, like you rightly emphasized, I think banking and capital markets, I think the word risk and control means a lot.
Yes.
So they are highly regulated. So the moment they are regulated, I think you need to comply with the regulations of the various jurisdictions where they operate. So, for example, FINMA is the regulatory authority for Switzerland.
Yeah.
For Singapore, it's Monetary Authority of Singapore, and for UK, it's the PRA. So all these regulatory bodies, they define certain guidelines which need to be followed by all the entities and enterprises. So when I talk about that, I think when I talk about specifically that aspect, I think I can think of one of the examples from my own experience. When I used to be head of private banking technology for India, at that time, one of the challenges which we used to face was around, the data confidentiality for client data.
Okay.
Because in the Swiss jurisdiction, the regulation is very, very strict, wherein you can't expose the data to external, countries.
Right.
So only people who are based out of Switzerland can access that data.
Okay.
So what it meant was, we had to structure the work in such a way that the development and system integration testing work could be done out of India. And whereas the user acceptance testing was something which could be done only in Switzerland.
Right.
So as a result, of course, even for development work, we need data. So instead of using the real data, we used to have synthetic data,
Right.
So do that. So this helped us to, kind of address that challenge. But this was with an internal process, internal guideline, internal approval process, which involved both legal and compliance. So before any work could be done out of India, we had to go through that elaborate process, which would take sometimes weeks. And post that only we could do that work. So this is just one example, right? But in the APAC jurisdictions, the law is a little bit more lenient.
Okay.
They allow the data as long as it's anonymized.
Okay.
So but even though the data is anonymized, it has to be certified that there is no client data in there by IT risk, specialist, and also certified by the compliance department. So
Right.
so those were checks and balances put in place to ensure that the controls are in place. So this is one way of the bank ensuring that the controls were in place.
Got
So, and the second aspect is around, I already talked about, delivering quality.
Yes.
So I think you need to deliver quality, and that's another way of earning the trust of your global stakeholders.
Makes sense.
And the last thing is, when you have end-to-end ownership, so the ownership, is still, when something goes into production, something breaks or fails in production, you need to have the SMEs who are owning that, addressing that problem in the business hours of the jurisdictions which you are supporting. So to give you an example, we were supporting a P&L application,
Okay.
where we had to produce the P&L report every day for the bank morning at around 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So, and this was a Singapore jurisdiction.
Okay.
So which means we, in India, it was like 5:30 in the morning. So there were instances when systems would break down, the end of day batch will fail. And my team members, the leads who had that accountability and ownership, had to get up very early in the morning to address those issues in time.
Right.
And it also involved talking to the business users in Singapore to understand what kind of solutions we can put in place quickly to address the challenge.
Right.
So all that comes with purely having not just the technical knowledge but also the domain knowledge to be able to talk to the business users.
Right.
So that is another way of ensuring that you gain the trust of your global stakeholders so that they can give you the accountability and ownership.
That makes sense. Yes. I think trust and ownership has become far more important than it has been, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah,
and listening to you speak about these insights and interspersing certain anecdotes from your experience would definitely give a lot more insights to aspiring GCC leaders, I think, today.
Yeah, agreed.
So beyond ownership and trust, today in the domain of banking and capital markets, we see that they are navigating through AI, increasing regulatory complexity, evolving customer expectations, and new operating models. So for global capability centers, in this evolving age and the age of AI, what do you think will their role be, say, in 3 to 5 years from today?
Yeah, I think very, very pertinent question. So
Yes.
I think what I would say, is, currently all the GCCs are focusing on costs. They're cost centric, but I'm expecting, especially the global banks, which are part of, in the capital markets, investment banking, private banking, wealth management space, I'm expecting them to be more front office aligned.
Right.
So, and significantly more, alpha driven as well as client outcome driven. So this is at a broad level, but I see 4 themes evolving, which is where I see the next 3 to 5 years the GCCs in India should be.
Okay.
So the first theme in my view is, I think they have to move away from being cost centric to alpha generation for the clients. So what I mean by this, I'll give you a few examples from the private banking and the wealth management side. So we can have AI assisted, portfolio construction and rebalancing engines
Right.
being developed and delivered out of the GCCs. So we could have, real-time Gen AI assisted pilots for the relationship managers to help them to interface with their clients, ultimate clients, in a much more efficient way.
Right.
So this is on the private banking and wealth management side. If you look at the IB and capital market side, I'm really expecting a lot of things can be delivered from here.
Right.
For example, in the area of deal analytics, pitch book automation, valuation models,
Right.
even quant models for alpha signal generation.
Right.
So, and these pretty much on leveraging analytics in AI.
Right. Right.
So, but there could also be NLP driven, earnings call analysis, new sentiment analysis. So all of that could also be done.
Right.
So, so that's the first topic. Moving from cost centric to becoming alpha, generation enablement engines. So I think that's the first theme. The second theme is I would expect the GCCs in India to become more high end when it comes to risk, pricing, and also structuring hubs. That's where I foresee them to be.
Okay.
So on the risk side, I think traditionally it's risk is always calculated end of day. But I expect with the evolution of technology like AI, I think we would have real-time risk engines calculating market risk, counterparty risk, as well as liquidity risk.
Right.
So, and another theme which I'm expecting on the pricing side is on the derivatives pricing models and also on the structured products modeling. So I think those can also come from the GCC in India. So that's the second theme. The third theme is end-to-end ownership for wealth and investment platforms. So within the wealth platforms, before I give you some examples, I would just like to clarify that I think end-to-end ownership doesn't mean that we need to have all the people sitting in India. End-to-end ownership means the ownership sits here in the GCC, while we could still have teams across the globe who are working with the owner in India and driving the eventual outcome of running the platform. So to quote a few examples on the wealth management side, you could have platforms for portfolio management systems, client reporting, and the attribution engines for performance. Right. So all that can be done. So this is example on the private banking and wealth management side. If I look at the investment banking side, there is definitely an opportunity to own end-to-end electronic trading applications and also the order management system and execution management system. So that's the third theme. And the fourth theme is where it's very much focused on the private banking and wealth management side. Ultra high net worth clients, we could have a specialized focus on the customer experience for ultra high net worth clients. So I would call that ultra high net worth client experience engineering. So the reason I say engineering is because first of all, ultra high net worth client as a segment is very different from other segments within the wealth management space, and they require high touch, trust centric relationships. So in order to enable that, we need to provide them hyper personalized investment insight dashboards, right? And we could also provide them with some kind of a real time portfolio visualization for their performance of their portfolios. So again, these are some examples. Yeah, there could be a lot more cases. So like I said, I mean, these are the four themes which could be the focus for the current GCCs for the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. I think all these four themes that you spoke about is very insightful and holds a lot of potential for global capability centers within the banking and capital markets domain. I'm sure a lot of the aspiring GCC leaders may really want to implement all these ideas across the four themes. But the biggest question that emerges is how do they actually get started? What do they actually do to implement and get to that state?
I mean, Very pertinent question. I think the way I would look at it is, I think we always have to start small. So we
Yes.
have to prove our capability. So in order to prove that, I think we have to start taking small portions. I talked about end-to-end ownership of the platform. In order to do that, you definitely need to start somewhere. You have to own portions of that platform. And in order to do that, I think you definitely need to have the capability to do that.
Yes.
Capability is not just technical capability; is also the domain capability. So you need to build that as a first step. Once you build that, definitely you can start taking chunks of work where you have ownership for a smaller portion. It could be a project, it could be a program, it could be a small application. That's where you start. And
Right.
once you have done that, you have to continue to focus on improving the domain knowledge, so that you are able to talk to the business users in the global locations,
Right.
their language,
Right.
to make sure that they have the trust to give you a bigger portion of the pie. So that's the way I would go about it.
Right. So we've spoken about evolution of global capability centers from the time you began your career
Yeah.
to where they are today. We've also spoken about what differentiates a successful global capability center from an execution partner alone. We've also spoken about ownership and trust playing a very vital role in the banking and capital markets domain. We've also spoken about where global capability centers are headed to in the next 3 to 5 years. And you've also given us some insights on how they can start to develop that enduring strategic capability. So, to all the GCC leaders who have tuned in to our conversation today, if you were to coach them today, what would you tell them are the key takeaways from your conversation? And what is the single most important thing? I know it's very tough to single out something and say that this is the most important, but still, I ask this question: what is the single most important thing that they should do today?
Yeah, I think, since this is all about GCCs, so I really want to talk about, the full form of GCC. It's the Global Capability Center.
Yes.
And the central word there is capability. So if you really want to build capability, the team in India, which is part of the GCC, needs to understand the context or the business which they are operating in. I'm talking about private banking, wealth management, investment banking, capital markets. So which means if the teams in India need to be successful, I think they need to build the context of the business and the capability around the business, and not just focus on technology.
Right.
If we start with that objective and not necessarily only take technology people and train them on business, and can also do vice versa, take people from business and train them on technology, so that the capability is something which is at the center of the GCC.
Right.
If that's the direction in which we move, I think I'm pretty sure we'll be in a very different space in 3 to 5 years.
Right. Thank you so much, Suresh, for your time and for sharing your experiences and giving such valuable insights. Thank you for tuning into Practitioner's Chair. Until next time, thank you for your time, and we hope this conversation has been useful and valuable to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanu. Thank you, everyone.